Welcome to A Kid's Life podcast. I'm Angela Lockwood, and for the last 20 years, I have been working in schools, supporting teachers to build inclusive classrooms. Through A Kid's Life podcast, my goal is to help us adults better understand the complexities of life as a kid. My guests and I share stories, reflections, and simple strategies to support kids of all needs as they walk through life. So whether you're looking for inspiration, direction, guidance, tips, or just a laugh, A Kid's Life podcast is the place for you. Enjoy. Welcome to A Kid's Life podcast. You're with me, Angela Lockwood, and you are with also Luke Lindsay. Luke Lindsay is General Manager of Lifeline Queensland and Statewide Services. And the reason I'm bringing Luke on to A Kid's Life podcast is because he knows every single day the impact of mental health, mental illness is having on our kids. And it is such an important topic right now that we need to share far and wide. And Luke definitely knows his stuff, not only being the General Manager of Lifeline in Queensland, but also he's an experienced mental health leader. He has a whole range of qualifications in mental health, being a Master's of Mental Health, Diploma of Health Management, clinical nursing, mental health. He also has a really long career, over 18 years of acute and remote psychiatry, management roles, leadership. This guy knows his stuff. And we know right now we are being bombarded with tips and strategies, and there's a lot of noise out there and a lot of information on how to look after ourselves. And sometimes we can get lost in the overwhelm of all that. What I want to do is go straight to the source of somebody who sees this all the time, but not only just sees it, is also looking to implement really real strategies to support us adults, us parents, on how, and teachers and healthcare professionals, of how we can better support our young people. So Luke, I welcome you to A Kid's Life podcast.
Thanks, Ange. It's great to be here. And that is a fantastic intro. It really makes me sound like I know what I'm talking about, doesn't it?
One of my things in my whole career, Luke, is always surrounding myself with people much smarter who know their stuff to make me look good. And that's exactly why I've brought you on here, because you know this stuff inside and out. And it's, I don't know, what are you finding right now, Luke? Like, I'm feeling overwhelmed for our kids. I'm, obviously through my work as an occupational therapist, I'm feeling and I'm seeing and hearing the anxiety that's being faced by a lot of kids. Are you seeing that through the services you guys provide too?
Absolutely. And look, I think what's really important to remember at the moment is that these are crazy times. And I think often what we're hearing, what we're seeing is parents and teachers and any kind of adults that have regular contact with kids, they're feeling overwhelmed. This is new territory. They're not sure how to navigate this territory. And for a lot of people, they've often experienced and managed their own concerns with their own mental health. But often when that mental health or those mental health concerns have an impact on their kids, or they start to notice behavioural changes or changes in their own kids' kind of well-being and mental health, they're not quite sure what to do. And I think at the moment, that is just amplified on top of this crazy 18 months of what has been the pandemic. What we're seeing right now is a lot of people reaching out to ask, what do I do? Where do I start? Who do I go to?
Yeah. And we forget about that too, don't we? That yes, as adults, we're experiencing all this overwhelm and we're hearing all the negativity, but our kids are also hearing the same thing because we've got the news on in the background. They're on social media as well. So they're having this constant barrage of information too. So, I dare I say it, we're all in this together, hashtag it. But really I sounded so uncool then, but really we are, aren't we? Kids and adults, we are actually facing the same challenges right now.
Yeah, we absolutely are. And I think, certainly from a Lifeline perspective, we do a lot of work around talking about how to actually provide simplified coping strategies, really simple things. And one of those that we talk about a lot with adults is around really limiting our access to social media and to news. Because, we talk about anticipatory anxiety. And so that is where we are surrounded by the barrage of news and media and social media in relation to the pandemic. And often it's quite catastrophized. And so as an adult, it really can increase our anxiety. It can, have an impact on our sleep and on our appetite, personality changes, a whole range of things. But the reality is our kids are having the exact same experiences. So our kids are also being exposed to constant media, social media, friends and family talking about it, their friends and their mates talking about it. So not only as adults are we being exposed to this, so are our kids. And I think that whole concept of really limiting our exposure to media and to news at the moment, I think that's probably more important that we have that focus for our kids, because often we have the capacity to be able to, work our way through the news and the media and work out what we want to listen to and what we don't, what's factual and perhaps what's, not factual. But our kids don't. What they hear is what they believe. And often they may not understand what they hear. They may interpret it in a particular way, or they may just completely take it out of context and not share that with anyone, but actually internalize that. That can lead to an increase in anxiety and kind of personality changes, particularly for our young people. I mean, I think one of the really important things, Angie, is it's really important to have conversations with our kids at the moment, not to avoid them, because for a lot of people, they feel like if we avoid having conversations with our young people, then we're not going to expose them unnecessarily. But the reality is, whether we like it or not, they're being exposed. So the importance of not avoiding conversations, but really having COVID-19 and pandemic and restrictions and lockdowns and those kind of conversations with our kids is really, really important. Being really honest and being really open, but making sure our conversations are age appropriate is really important. But also just that undercurrent of staying positive and hopeful. So not focusing on the doom and gloom, but really making sure those conversations are age appropriate. But there's also, they end on a positive note, and we really kind of instill hope into our kids within those conversations, because the reality is we don't know what's coming. We don't know what's around the corner. We don't know what the next round of restrictions or lockdowns are going to look like, but we don't need to share that with our kids. We need to, protect them from that. And by reducing their exposure to excessive news and media is a really practical way of doing that.
And it's the balance, isn't it, too, between the negative media, but also not being overly positive and pretending it doesn't exist, because I'm finding that balance even with the young kids that I work with in primary schools. They're asking me questions that I'm thinking, why are you even thinking about this right now? Like, how is that even in your realm? And sometimes it's a very adult language that they're using. And I wonder around the conversations that are happening in people's homes at the moment, the negative language that's being used around lockdowns versus the reality language. I can see why people are getting overwhelmed, Luke, by what's the right thing to do. But I love your strategy around, you can be in control of what you're listening to. And I guess going to credible sources as well is a really important part of that, rather than scrolling through Facebook and thinking that's where you're going to get your best information from.
Absolutely. And I think that sense of control is really important. And I think for our kids, let's focus on the things that children can control. Okay, so they can't control what the daily numbers are. They can't control what the lockdown or the restrictions or the border impacts are going to be. But what they can do is they can control really practical things. So, really focusing with kids on how they can stay safe and healthy is important. Really getting them to engage in practical things they can do that will help them feel empowered rather than feeling helpless. So, basic things like reminding kids about hand hygiene. So teaching them how to wash their hands properly, teaching them how to apply hand sanitizer and when to apply. Things like, blowing their nose and coughing and sneezing into their elbow rather than their hand. Some really practical things that kids can actually be in charge of and feel empowered, because they can't control what's happening with the pandemic, whether they're vaccinated, whether they're, heading into a lockdown zone. But some of those smaller practical things they can control. And at a subconscious level, that can be incredibly grounding for kids.
I had an alarming conversation, a comment from a child who was 7 this week. And he came up to me and he said, I want to get the COVID. And I looked at him and I said, well, sorry, what did you say? Obviously, it caught me off guard. And he said, I want to get the COVID. And I just said, what does that mean to you? And he goes, it means I can have some days off school. Now, I don't mean to make light of that comment, but it did really catch me off guard, because I thought, isn't that an interesting thing that really is what this young boy is seeing COVID is all about? And it's alarming in one sense, but it's also just showing the innocence of what kids really are taking in, that he's probably heard that And that's all he wants to do is get it. But, obviously there was a little bit of conversation happened off the back end of that. But if kids are finding it really troubling at the moment, Luke, obviously there'd be signs and signs and things as parents and as adults working with children that we should be aware of. What would they be right now? What should we be on the lookout for if it's tipping over into causing anxiety or, our kids feeling under pressure?
Yeah. Look, I think we know that kids look to their parents or to their carers as a guide in relation to, how they react to situations. So if we can show our kids that we're calm, that creates a sense of calmness and reduces anxiety in those kids. So as frustrated as we may be, with the pressures of homeschooling and not being able to cross the border or not being able to move out of a lockdown zone, we need to really role model a sense of calmness because our kids look to us and they will often base their own emotional response to situations based on what they see, from their parents or from their carers. Now, I think it's really important to look out for signs of anxiety or for stress in the kids because we know everybody reacts differently in stressful situations. And some kids are naturally more anxious than others. That's just the reality. And the pandemic, can have a pretty significant impact in the way in which they exhibit stress or the way in which they exhibit anxiety. But it's really important to keep an eye out for the kind of highly anxious or unusual behaviour in your kids. And often younger kids can show signs such as, some really obvious things like changes in their behaviour, which are out of character. Perhaps they're more emotional than they usually are, or we're seeing, greater temper tantrums, for want of a better word, or we're seeing, significant changes in their sleeping patterns. They're not being able to fall asleep or they're not wanting to get out of bed. Or even they're eating and their appetite. So they're not hungry or they're eating, excessively. So those kind of really visual and obvious changes. And we know for older kids, obviously they can experience the same signs, but also what we see in older kids that are experiencing anxiety is they become more easily distracted. Often we'll find they're having trouble concentrating or becoming a bit forgetful. And often, in some cases, we can see kids start to develop, repetitive or obsessive type behaviours, which is often a really early sign of anxiety in kids. And it may be things, particularly in this context, around, being overly concerned with germs. It may be things like, wanting to wear their mask inside the home as well as outdoors, or excessively wanting to wash their hands, or really wanting to clean everything, which may be out of character for them. So it's those kinds of signs that we're looking for, particularly those emotional changes in both younger kids and older kids.
Yeah, thanks for that, Luke, because I was, obviously listening very intently there. And a couple of those I'd never even thought of. Things like, wearing a face mask in the home or, obsessively washing their hands or cleaning up. Yeah, I'd never really thought that they would be signs. So they're really powerful things as parents, because I think we always need to be on the lookout for our children for changes in behaviour, pandemic or not. I know that I sat on a recent webinar about vaping and I could feel going, oh my gosh, there's something else we've got to think about now as a parent. But the reality I see, being a parent of young kids myself is we always have to be communicating with our kids, don't we, about the reality of life, but at an age appropriate level. Is this pandemic or not, it's that connection that's really important.
It really is. And I think early intervention is absolutely the key, regardless of the scenario or the situation or world events. Early intervention is our greatest approach in terms of getting onto things early. We know that we have much more successful outcomes when we intervene really early. So it's when we do, as parents or carers or guardians, pick up on those early signs of anxiety or distress or changes in mood and those kind of things, that actually we open up those conversations really early. And we do it in a way that's not a kind of sit down question and answer type approach, but we do it in a way where, we may incorporate some of those inquiring related questions into perhaps an activity we're doing. We might be kicking the football outside, with our child, or we might be doing a jigsaw puzzle, and we kind of open up some non-confrontational, informal questioning around, hey, I noticed you've really been struggling to fall asleep the last week or so. What happens for you when you go to bed? What do you think about? Like, what do you do? Just to kind of open those very safe conversations so the child feels as though it's just a normal, informal conversation whilst engaging in activity. And because often that is where we get the most amount of information, is when we're engaged in that informal approach. And that gives us a whole set of information we can then start to make some informed decisions around. Like, okay, we think we can manage this at home by making a few practical changes, or actually this has been going on, for weeks or for months now. And actually we think it's time to reach out and ask for some further support. And look, I am going to shamelessly plug this, but something like making a call to Lifeline and talking through what the concerns are in relation to your own mental health and well-being and your child's and the impact, and talking through some of your options often leads to things like reaching out and making that initial contact with your general practitioner, to get some advice on, do we think this is an issue that perhaps, we might want to go and see a paediatrician about? Is this an issue we might want to talk to a counsellor or a psychologist about, or some other form of allied health professional? So I think that was a very long-winded way, and just saying, those early interventions, the earlier we notice the changes in behaviour or the changes in what would be out of context for our child, the quicker we can get in to start those conversations. So I really strongly encourage early intervention.
And I understand the importance of tribe. We talk about kids having really good support systems and good mates and good people they can hang out with that they can trust. But that's equally as important for adults, isn't it? How important is it to have friends that you as a parent can speak to as well about some of the issues that your kids are facing?
Look, it's really vital, Ange, and I think often from a Lifeline perspective, throughout the last 18 months, obviously across Queensland, we've seen a significant increase in calls to Lifeline. So we've seen about a 20 to 25% increase in calls. And often it's a lot of first-time callers, so people that may not have historically called Lifeline. And, there's a range of reasons that people are feeling overwhelmed. A lot of them are related to the pandemic now, whether that be financial pressure or job uncertainty. We're seeing an increase in domestic and family violence and alcohol use in the homes because people are spending more time together and feeling more overwhelmed. And so we're seeing people reach out to start to have some of these conversations and say, I'm not coping. And I guess what's really important is right now it is okay to not feel okay. And what's really important is that actually we do reach out for help. We start those conversations and we feel comfortable having those conversations. We push past that perception of stigma and we actually start engaging. Now, whether that be with our neighbour, with a friend, with a work colleague, whoever you feel safe and comfortable with. Because just as we focus on early intervention for young people, early intervention for adults is just as important. Being able to open up and start those conversations. So we feel we've got a safe space, and often just being able to get some things off your chest and talk things through with someone close to you, can be really, really successful in terms of getting on top of those things that are contributing to that general feeling of being overwhelmed. Because we know, for example, if we think about, there's a program that's offered across a number of states and it's called COPMI, so Children of a Parent with a Mental Illness. And there's a lot of this kind of early intervention where children who have a parent who experiences or has a mental illness requires a tribe, as you said, but, a series of kind of support around them, to help cope with what's going on. And I think where a child has an adult carer, a parent, whoever that may be in their life, that is their primary source of support. And if that person is not coping, ultimately the child will be impacted by that in terms of what they're exposed to, in terms of what they see and hear. So it's really important that we create a community of mentally healthy adults that could support our children to also be mentally healthy.
I know even with my children's circle of friends as well, like I'm so fortunate to have people who I trust that I know that they have my kids back. And I think for me as a parent, that makes me feel a lot calmer in my parenting, that sometimes I won't get it all right. In fact, most of the time I probably won't. I'll try, but I probably won't. But I know that, trusted people around my kids is also allowing me to be a better parent, because being able to chat to those parents, or knowing that if they saw something in my kids that was concerning them, they would let me know. And I know one of the things I talk to my kids about is around them knowing that they have a crew around them that aren't just their kids. But if you don't want to talk to me, then there's, another friend parents you can talk to, or there's, your uncle. Feel free to pick up the phone. I know my kids my son in particular on his phone has got my brother's phone number so that if he doesn't want to talk to me, he lives, 10 hours away, he can pick up the phone and have a chat to him. And having that big network, I often sort of picture these, long arms like a tree, coming out, that they've got their base and they've got their root in the family, but there's letting them know that there is a whole crew around them who have got their back is super important. But because I guess, Luke, what I often think about is services like Lifeline have been around. How many years has Lifeline? You'd think I would have done my research on this, but how many years has Lifeline?
Yeah, so it's about, I think we're heading into our 59th year.
Wow. So for 59 years, Lifeline has been supporting people with their mental well-being. But I just find it fascinating that such a service has so many people that contact them. Because does it take a little bit of courage to pick up the phone and talk to a stranger? Or is it the opposite?
Absolutely.
Is it the opposite where they go, actually, I don't want to share what I'm struggling with right now. I'll speak to somebody who I know is a safe person as a Lifeline counsellor. Or is it a bit of column A and column B?
Yeah, to be honest, it's a bit of both. And we've got a cohort of people that call Lifeline because from a brand, it's a trusted brand, it's been around for a long time, and there's really, really successful outcomes for many people that have called Lifeline. And so for a lot of people, there is still the perception of stigma. And one of the biggest challenges to anyone in our community accessing appropriate and timely mental health support is that challenge of stigma. It is that fear of what will people think of me. It is that perception of it is weak to reach out and ask for help and to acknowledge that I'm not coping. And so for a lot of people, they don't want to reach out to family, friends, neighbours, colleagues because they feel they'll be burdening them, or they fear judgment of what the other person may feel. So it's easier to pick up the phone and call Lifeline because when you call Lifeline, you're anonymous. We don't ask for your details. You are an anonymous caller. And so some people feel really comfortable doing that. For other people, they call Lifeline purely because they don't have anyone else to reach out to. And so for a lot of people that are experiencing isolation or loneliness, Lifeline is their only option to reach out to and to ask for support. Because obviously, particularly over the last 18 months, we've seen a significant increase in social isolation and loneliness. And for a lot of people, Lifeline is their connection into the world in terms of accessing support. But I think in terms of those kind of long arms of the tree that you talked about, I think that's really important. And often, it is really important to encourage kids that you may not want to talk to us about this because you may be worried that you'll get in trouble, or you may be worried, that we won't respond the way you want us to respond as parents. But really promoting that wider support network in terms of, adult friends, neighbours, older siblings, teachers, childcare workers, people they have regular contact with within their week is so unbelievably important. Because what we want our kids to feel safe and comfortable asking for help if they need it. Doesn't matter who that's from. If that's from their teacher or if that's from their mum or their dad, it doesn't matter who it's from. Because ultimately, that will start the conversations to steer that young person toward the support they need. So you're absolutely right. Building that wider social network around access to supportive people is really, really important.
And Luke, before we finish up, I need to ask you a question. I've always had this image of people who work at Lifeline being these beautiful, calm souls who are just sitting there, waiting. How do people become a part of Lifeline and in this such a vital service? I've never understood how that comes about. So could you dispel some myths? And particularly if anyone's listening, and I think this is really important, there are people out there right now who want to do something bigger than themselves, that want to be of service to a community, know that, they have gifts that they can share with people. Is Lifeline potentially one of those, opportunities for people who want to play a bigger part in, assisting kids with their mental health?
Fantastic question. I'm always open to a shameless plug of becoming a crisis support.
Oh, sorry. I was asking for a friend of mine.
No, look, absolutely. And I think one of the amazing things about Lifeline, and look, across Queensland, we've got 600 plus and crisis supporters.
Oh,
now,
wow.
Those crisis supporters are essentially, they're made up of a whole range of different people from our community. We've got people in their early 20s who are at university studying social work, psychology, occupational therapy, that actually want to develop those micro skills and get on the phones and really start to make a difference. And we've got, a range of people that work, in full-time and part-time jobs, but also come in and do volunteer shifts to give back to the community. And we've got a whole range of people that have retired, that have got a whole life, brilliant life experience, that have done the training and that come in to give back and contribute to their community. So in terms of our crisis supporters, we've got a significant range of different types of people from all walks of life. Now, in terms of what makes a good crisis supporter, it's someone who has got really good active listening skills. It's someone who, is completely, non-judgmental, and someone who just has that, really kind of soft and empathic and caring nature that's actually able to, to provide some really good support. Now, we have a fantastic training program. So for anyone that is listening, that is interested, they can go onto the Lifeline Queensland website and you'll find the information on how to apply to become a crisis supporter. Now, we offer a range of different training modalities. The training runs anywhere between kind of 10 to 18 weeks. We do virtual training, we do a blend of virtual and face-to-face, and we do pure face-to-face. And we have 10 centres across Queensland where that happens, but also in New South Wales, it's a very similar process. And the training is quite intense. Then there is a process whereby you have some kind of mentorship and call coaching and supervision with an accredited crisis supporter. And then eventually when you get to the end of all of that and you're comfortable and you're competent and everyone's happy, you become an accredited crisis supporter. So you can actually start taking calls on your own from one of our centres. But look, absolutely, we're always open and welcoming to people that are interested in becoming a crisis supporter. And we run a whole series of different information sessions in groups and one-on-one. But anyone who is interested, we'd be really happy to have a conversation with you and talk you through the finer details of what's involved.
And as always, I'll link to everything that we've spoken about throughout this conversation that I've had with Luke at the bottom of the podcast. But Luke, if people are really struggling right now and they do need to contact Lifeline, what is the number and what's the easiest way that they can make connection?
Yeah, so look, our 13 11 14 number is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But look, there are some people that aren't quite ready to pick up the phone. So we also provide our services via text messages and via online chat. So for those people that feel more comfortable, and it's often our younger generation that, online chat and text is like second nature to them, we also run the online chat and text services as well. So all three of those options are available.
Look, Luke, unfortunately, our time is finishing up. I feel like I could keep speaking to you. There's so many things that is really important for our kids right now, and in looking after their mental health is of utmost importance. And also looking after your own mental health as an adult is so important right now. And I thank you, Luke, for the services that you guys all provide through Lifeline. And yeah, please just far and wide, if this is something that you're really struggling with or you have somebody in your life that you're struggling with, please contact any of the numbers that are below on this or any of the connection points that is below this podcast. But Luke, thank you so much for your time. I know you're a super busy man, and yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
No problems. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, you've been listening to a Kids Life podcast with Angela Lockwood. And of course, I was joined by Luke Lindsay, the General Manager of Lifeline Queensland and Statewide Services. For all other information about Lifeline and of course, about any issues that are facing kids right now, please subscribe to a Kids Life podcast in all of the places where podcasts are delivered. Enjoy your day, and I appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you for listening to a Kids Life podcast. To stay up to date with all new episodes, please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. If you want to know more about the Inclusive Classroom or any of the other programs I provide, please go to angelalockwood.com.au. And until next time, slow down, have fun, and enjoy.